Welcome to the Ultimate Game Master's Guide for Ultimate Game Masters. Part 2. Books and Dice.
Alright, so now that you know what your role is in the group, it's time to start thinking about your first session. For a lot of GMs, myself included, this was a nerve-wracking session, but that doesn't mean it has to be for you. But before we start to prep, we must acquire. You will need to attain some books either in printed or PDF format which detail the rules and lore of the game you are trying to run. If you're playing D&D, you will need to get the Player's Handbook for the edition of D&D you are running, as will your players, although you can share one copy of the book around during the session. As the DM, you might also pick up the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual for that edition. The Player's Handbook lists all the rules on how to play the game in general, while the Dungeon Master's Guide has tables and rules specifically for the DM and lists magical items and other useful tools. The Monster Manual, however, details the descriptions of various monsters you can have your party encounter, as well as their stat blocks which explain the rules on how to use the monsters both in and out of combat. If you are not playing D&D, you can instead find the equivalents of these books for the particular game you are running. A lot of books use terms like core rules or core rule book, which would be the equivalents of the player handbook. As for the other books, they have a huge variety of different names, so make sure you check the descriptions of the books so that you can find the ones you need. As a rule of thumb, you need one or several books that explain the rules both for you and your players and the various NPCs monsters that are used when running the game. In addition to the books, you will also need various polyhedral dice. That's dice with various amounts of sides. Each TTRPG will likely list which dice are most commonly used when playing your chosen RPG, so make sure you stock up on those dice before the game starts. Most gaming stores have them in stock. When the books reference things like 1d4, 1d8, 1d20, always remember that the first number determines the amount of dice and the second determines how many sides each dice has. For instance, a 4d6 means rolling 4 6-sided dice. All that being said, if you're playing in a virtual tabletop, the program itself will have dice rollers included in its software. But there's a certain charm to rolling them in your hands, trust me. Hearing all of that, you will realize that yes, GMing any TTRPG requires a lot of reading. But fear not, as you can segment the reading material into what's critical for the first session and then read on when further sessions arise. Therefore, I will illustrate which pieces of data are crucial for your first session and which ones you can leave for later in descending order. The rules regarding core mechanics. Every TTRPG has a set of rules that represent the meat and potatoes of the game. For D&D, this is definitely the D20 die and adding or subtracting a number from the rolled result. Other game systems have different and potentially more complex systems, and it's up to you to determine which of these are most extensively used in the game. Once you have, figure out how it works. The relevant lore of the game. This point is equally important to the former, but you do not have to learn the entirety of the game's lore prior to your first session. For a game like D&D, this would mean thousands of hours of reading time, which just isn't plausible. Instead, if you're running a pre-made adventure or have decided to run the game in a particular area of the game world, you should focus on reading lore-related material that's relevant for that area. Again, you can prioritize lore in terms of proximity, in other words, the lore that you think will be relevant during the session. As the campaign progresses, you can expand your knowledge by reading more and more. As time passes, you'll gradually become more and more knowledgeable in this regard, so don't be afraid to look things up in the book if the players ask you a lore-related question that you don't know at the time. Class knowledge. Each TTRPG usually has some sort of mechanic that attributes a set of skills and abilities to a particular character. These are usually called classes. Even if the game does not feature them and has a more free-form character building rule, you should familiarize yourself with the quote-unquote classes of the player characters. Again, you don't have to learn every single class in the game yet, just the ones that the players are playing, and then expand your knowledge as the campaign progresses. Intricate game mechanics. As you are playing the game, your players will undoubtedly try to perform an action that isn't entirely explained in the rules, or you simply don't know how to resolve it. The simple solution to this is taking a short amount of time to try and find the relevant rule in the book. However, sometimes even the books won't be able to explain a rule that would illustrate how to perform that very specific action. This is where you come in. You have to find the closest rule there is in the book and then adapt it so that it will also accommodate that action. For instance, if you're playing D&D and a character wants to throw a grappling hook behind an enemy's neck and then pull the enemy towards them, there's no specific rule in the book that would explain that particular situation. Therefore, you may ask the player to make an attack roll followed by an ability check of some sort, probably strength. The background lore of the game. This is all the lore that's currently not relevant to your particular adventure, but might be at some point later on. You can take your time with this and slowly expand your knowledge by reading this lore. However, in a game like D&D where spells can conjure creatures from other planes or even transport players to and from them, there might come a time where your players surprise you in this way by utilizing those abilities. Therefore, it is good to at least have a cursory examination of the background lore. Once you have all your tools and your resources, there's one more thing left to do before session 0, and that is to figure out what you are going to play within the realm of the RPG you have chosen to play. In order to figure that out, check out the next part of this guide. If you like this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Remember to click the notification bell so you are notified when the next video drops. Happy GMing!